with Mentimeter, but it's a way that we can ask some questions and you can be involved. So, as I've said, today's session is around partnership working and the way that local frontline networks have enabled frontline staff from the statutory sectors, from the DWP, from the Jobcentre, and frontline staff from homelessness agencies to get together and discuss the issues affecting the people that we all try to support. Zoe and Donna both represent frontline networks, Coventry and Blackpool, Wyre and Fylde frontline network, and they've both got some really fantastic experience to share. Next slide, please. Just a bit of housekeeping. Please use the question and answers function in Zoom, which is at the bottom of the screen there. You can use that throughout the presentations. If you have any questions you want to ask for Donna or Zoe, feel free to ask, and we'll have time at the end to discuss. And Mentimeter, as I said, if you could go to the next slide, please, Rachel. You can access Mentimeter either on your laptop, on another window, or on your mobile phone. You can take a scan of this code, or you can go to menti.com and input that number 32947277. That will come up again when we get to the point in the presentation where we're going to use Menti. So that will become clear, but it might be helpful just to get that up on your laptop or on your phone now. Okay, and it's optional, no pressure, but if you'd like to chip in with your views on some of the questions that we're going to ask, then we'd be really, really pleased to hear from you. So moving on, I'm going to hand over to our two presenters today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Naomi. Morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm based at Coventry Citizens Advice. We've been running the Coventry Frontline Network for the last 5 years. Yeah, I guess to kind of set the scene, in terms of working together with statutory services and other services, whether that's locally or nationally, I suppose the aim of working together and building those relationships is so that we can build on good practice, what's working, and perhaps where things could improve, it gives us the chance to talk about opportunities for change. So when Donna and I were kind of talking through, you know, where do you start with that kind of work? I suppose one of the first questions we thought about asking was, who do you actually need to talk to about your issue? So whatever problems or improvements that you've got regarding the services that your clients receive, it's important to know who can actually do something about that process. So I suppose it kind of roughly breaks down into two sections. It's not an exact science, but you've kind of got the policy aspect. So that's very kind of top down. It might be a legal obligation that's set by national government or by your local authority. And because it's a very sort of formal process in order to get that kind of thing changed, it could take a very long time. It could involve white papers, green papers, calls for evidence, consultations to all progress through to legislation. So that's the kind of very big picture framework. That's what has to be delivered. But then you have the practice, which is how that's actually delivered. And that can be a bit more grassroots. It's a bit more locally driven. Often those practices can be different in different areas, and if you know that particular job centres do something differently to your job centre, then that would illustrate that it's not something that's set in stone, and perhaps there's more flexibility to change and discuss how things could be done in a different way. And I think the other more kind of positive aspect of that is that you might be able to change things more quickly because you don't have to go through that kind of legislative process to get those things changed. So that's kind of a rough sort of split of where things might fit, whether they're the sort of what has to be delivered compared with how it's delivered. And there's different ways to influence how those different aspects could be changed. And we thought we'd start with that kind of grassroots level, perhaps keeping it kind of locally driven. And that's where Donna has some really great examples of working locally in Blackpool. And I won't steal too much of her thunder. I will hand over to Donna now to talk to you about that.
Thanks, Zoe. Next slide, please. Okay, hello, I'm Donna, Blackpool, Wyre and Fylde Frontline Network based at Street Life. Our example of the role of frontline networks is, like, as Zoe says, like using a grassroots approach. So our example is that Blackpool is like generally top of the pops in all things disadvantage and deprivation. We were one of the last rollouts in our locality, so we were actually in a more of an advantaged position. So we were able to sort of understand the national context of the issues that people were facing with the rollout of UC going live, and take into consideration our local context of deprivation, the families that we work with, the young people that we work with, and like the housing conditions that a lot of people live in. So taking that into consideration, we were able to sort of preempt the issues that maybe that we would be facing, and it was about timing that was particularly key for us. So we were going to sort of see if we can get these relationships established before the rollout happened. So then it was essential to identify who to talk to. A lot of organisations now do have partnership managers, so it is worth finding out who the partnership manager or advisor is in your area. So that's what we did, and then you can also identify that through the escalation routes, like the hierarchy, and so there's usually, like, you can speak to work coaches and like try and identify who to speak to. So building that relationship is key initially. Next slide, please. So how we brought DWP and homelessness staff together. First of all, we made that relationship with our partnerships managers, and we invited them to our annual Frontline Network conference. We thought it was essential also to invite the work coaches, and the aim of that was to see the human face of DWP and to build those initial relationships to move forward. As a rule, work coaches it's not part of their role to attend partnership meetings and stuff. So it's about making a case to the managers, the mutual benefits of the work coaches being part of the partnership. This is done by focusing on the shared objectives. We all want the same for all the people that we work with, and to support them the best that we can. Work coaches, as we identified later on, that work coaches' roles are very detailed, and there's quite a high expectation of them to understand and to support the people that they work with. So we found that it was important for the work coaches to know what services are out there and who to signpost in the future, and also to understand roles and responsibilities. We also did this by including DWP staff in e-newsletters and updates. We invite all staff, all frontline workers, to provide us with updates that we cascade along amongst our network. And this is like sort of it's shared learning amongst. And we also ask for DWP partnerships managers, so they share escalation route ways with us. We cascade them, and we do have examples of DWP staff sharing information with us and vice versa. Next slide, please. How did it make things better? It did. It certainly did. It improved relationships. Relationships we found were key. I don't think I did talk about the UC forums, so I'll go back on that one. Sorry everyone. As a result of this, we developed a UC forum, and we held them monthly initially, and then we held them bi-monthly after that. This is where work coaches, DWP partnerships managers, and frontline workers could all sit and share experiences, work out what was working, what wasn't working. We did a lot of sharing of best practice, and What was also we found of benefit was that partnerships managers were able to take what wasn't working to the job centre managers, which was able to directly change practice on the ground in the job centres. This thus like reducing bureaucracy and time. Better understanding of DWP staff roles and limitations. When people were face to face, they were able to explain what they were able to do, what they weren't able to do, what the expectations of them, and that reduced the us and them, if you will, that we all understood what we were able to do and what we weren't able to do. Work coaches' roles we found had changed since UC had come out. There was a lot of expectations for them to have knowledge to signpost to appropriate support services. However, work coaches didn't have that knowledge of what services were out there, so that was of benefit for work coaches. So there was a mutual benefit. Improved knowledge of escalation routes for individual issues. This we found was of benefit for the fact that if something wasn't being addressed, we could either discuss it there and then anonymously. However, we knew who to escalate the issue to, and additionally, it could be highlighted that sometimes the escalation route wasn't exactly working as it should be. So therefore, the partnerships managers were able to take that issue to a higher level to address it and put the appropriate staffing levels in to sort the issues out. Next slide, please. We also found that it's not particularly a tick box exercise. Once that relationship and then contacts have been made, it's essential to maintain those relationships. It's not static, it's pretty fluid. Job roles change, also systems within DWP change, different supports and different funding pots. It's essential to support each other's roles, and it's also important to keep managers buy-in, that sometimes the managers' structure changes also, and we have different partnerships managers. We've found this, especially post-pandemic, that needs to be sort of like linked in. People's roles have changed. So post-pandemic, we've found that whilst most of us have been working sort of physically in isolation, now that we've got a bit more freedom to go out and meet people, that like it's important to build those relationships back up and say hello. And I think another key point is see what meetings are out there. If you've got the time and the capacity to do so, most areas have like customer representative groups. I'd totally recommend attending if possible, where you can get to see what is happening within the system and get those relationships built and maintained. And I think on a grassroots level, I know I've just blurbed on a little bit, and please feel free to ask questions. I've been a little bit nervous about this, to be honest. On a grassroots level, this can help lead up to more the influencing issues that and work that Zoe's going to talk about just now. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I think that's back to me. Next slide, please, Rachel. Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, I suppose sort of building on what you've said there, Donna, in terms of getting involved in other local agency meetings and being aware of what's happening, particularly in your local area. One thing we wanted to sort of highlight was the homelessness forums that local authorities often hold, or that you may have in various areas. Certainly our local authority has a homelessness forum. And that's kind of, I suppose this is the next step up in terms of you've got local grassroots practice that can be sort of determined by whoever's running services in that area. This is the next step up, where perhaps the decisions are still taken at a local level by local authorities and councils at different levels, but it becomes a little bit more formal because they are setting their own sort of policies and agendas. So the way we've started to certainly engage with our local authority in that respect is through the Homelessness Forum. We find that lots of local agencies will attend that forum. Obviously sort of third sector agencies, advice services, street outreach, but also the council themselves. It's been a really useful way of meeting and connecting with lots of different departments, because obviously there's a lot of different services across local authority provision, and they've all got different teams and different managers. So through our forum, we know our housing and homelessness lead, so the sort of you know, the head of housing and homelessness effectively, and then there's also the manager of the homelessness prevention team, there's the homelessness commissioning manager, there's the team that manage the temporary accommodation provision, the connection with the private rental sector as well. So it's a really good way of connecting directly with local authority members, and asking questions of them. You know, if they're not putting things on the agenda that you want to talk about, we can put that forward to be discussed. So we have that meeting on a fairly regular basis. We have lots of other local meetings, so similar to in Blackpool, we've got a UC meeting, various sort of welfare meetings with various agendas and different agencies attending. We also hold our own Frontline Network forums, which most local partners will be doing. So if you have one in your area, I'm sure you'd be very welcome to sign up and come along. So we're in a really good position to be in touch with lots of different frontline services, particularly hearing directly from frontline workers as well, which is something that obviously the Frontline Network is very keen to do, to make sure that we start to build some of those links. I think one of the ethoses, if that's a word, of the national network is that frontline workers know what works. You're out there doing the job, you're doing the day job, you can see where things go well and you can see what things need to change. So it's really important that we hear from frontline workers and feed those views into decision makers wherever we can. So just as a quick break and to give Menti a bit of a go, so menti.com, I think we'd be interested just to hear from people whether you're aware of homelessness forums in your area. I suppose if you have any particular comments about how involved you are, how much engagement there is, if you'd like to share any thoughts in the chat as well, that would be great. But I'll give you a few moments just to go on to Menti. The code, if you need it, is 32947277. We need some holding music, don't we? We should have had some. Just imagine there's some lift music playing in the background. Yep, so some votes are coming through. Okay, yep, so almost a sort of fairly even split. Yeah, so people are sort of aware of homelessness forums in their area, and those that aren't maybe don't know. So perhaps you suspect that there is one. Certainly we know in our area it's not something that you can easily Google. You can't just kind of pop onto the council website and say when's the next homelessness forum, because it is a sort of professional forum rather than a public facing one. So I think that probably illustrates again the importance of knowing who your local contacts are. Your forum may sit under housing and homelessness, as ours does. It may be perhaps under health maybe, or adult social care, or communities board. So it could sit wherever your council feels that it should sit. So yeah, I guess put the feelers out. If there's anything the Frontline Network can help with in terms of connecting you with your local homelessness forum, feel free to get in touch and we'll see what we can do. So yeah, I think yeah, if we move on to the next slide, Rachel, thank you. Fab. Okay, so yeah, we wanted to talk about how you use those connections, I suppose, to effect change for the clients that you're supporting. And one way is certainly through those slightly more formal consultations. So as an example, in our area, we had proposals put forward by the council to introduce a charging policy for temporary accommodation, which most local authorities have. We didn't have one in Coventry at the time, and this was a proposal to bring one in. Obviously, that was quite a significant change for clients in TA to suddenly be faced with charges that they hadn't had to pay before. So as the Frontline Network, we were sort of aware that that change was coming in. We heard about it through the forum, through the local homelessness forum, and shared that then with our frontline workers locally to hear from them about what they thought, what the impacts would be on their clients, from a range of different homelessness services and advice agencies and support services as well. We were really lucky to get fairly senior attendance from the local authority at that meeting, where we had a sort of run through of the policy, which I think, as well as being able for them to present the policy and hear directly from frontline workers, I think the general discussion and the general points being made were also really useful. It's probably not that often that the head of housing and homelessness gets to hear directly from the frontline support workers in hostels or outreach. So I think that was a really positive step, just to have that conversation in the room as well. We drew together some recommendations, sort of heard what frontline workers had to say, and we were able to put in a reply to that consultation on behalf of the Coventry Frontline Network with various proposals that we'd like to see in terms of how the policy might change. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I think this is something Donna and I, we've been talking about, sort of stopping and checking in and saying, was what you did successful? And I think particularly with policy changes, it's probably fair to say that by the time something reaches consultation, it's 90% there. It's pretty much that's what the decision maker wants to implement. So I think something to bear in mind is that you're unlikely to be able to kind of rip up a policy and get it completely changed. And that's probably an expectation to manage when you're doing this kind of work. So it's fair to say the policy did get approved through the council with fairly few changes to it. It essentially sort of went in as the council had initially planned. But we would, it's worth stopping and reflecting, because there was one key ask that came from our frontline discussions, specifically looking at charges for storage when someone's keeping their furniture and belongings in storage whilst they're in TA. We asked whether there could be a grace period for that, really recognising that people could be, they've got a lot on their plate when they're moving from a homelessness situation into temporary accommodation. So to give them a month without storage charges to sort out their belongings at that point seemed like a practical idea. And that was implemented in the policy, which really it's worth stopping and following these things through and seeing where you have gained some successes. Might feel like quite a small change if you've asked for 10 things and you only get one, but that one change is going to make a difference to the people that are affected by it. And I think why that particular ask was successful was that it was quite specific. We didn't specifically ask for 1 month, but it was quite a contained thing to say, we think there should be a grace period, perhaps 3 months, perhaps 56 days under the Homelessness Reduction Act timescales. But it was, a very specific change that was kind of a yes or no decision. So that might be something to bear in mind, that sort of the more specific you can be with a request, that may give you more chance of success. Next slide, please. Yeah, we thought we'd ask some questions. I suppose not necessarily local authority, but any policy issues. Would be really interested to hear whether, sort of talking about these kind of issues, does it make you think of some further issues that you'd like to have some input on? And that might be sort of local delivery of, would you rather see text messages rather than phone calls from your job centre, or huge blue sky changes, let's get rid of the universal credit 5-week wait? What kind of policy issues as frontline workers are you seeing, I suppose, that cause your clients particular issues, or that you'd like to get involved in? I mean, small disclaimer, we're not saying we can necessarily influence any huge changes, but I think it's always really useful to have an idea of what those issues are. And Naomi mentioned the Frontline Workers Survey earlier, and that's again something really useful to have the views from hundreds and hundreds of frontline workers across the 4 nations. If there's issues that you're seeing now, they may not be on the agenda at the moment, but in the event that they do climb up the list in the next 6 to 12 months, if we know now that those are issues that we'd like to address, we're kind of primed and ready to go. There, thank you. Yes, I've got some got some responses coming through. I might have a little go on my own phone while I'm here.
So again, just to say, this is back on the Menti website, and you should be able to refresh the page and it will come up with this question. If you'd rather add your comments in the chat, feel free, you could do that as well.
Always the awkward pauses with online meetings. Countdown clock, I think that's what we need to set the timer. If anyone needs the code again, so it's 32947277. Great, yeah, we've got some responses coming through.
And just to say, if you do want to chip in and speak, please raise your hand, and we'll invite you to speak at the end once we've gone through the presentation, and we'll have a bit of time for conversation at the end. I can see a few people there are raising hands, so thank you.
Nice feedback for Coventry there, thank you. Or exempt accommodation, yeah, domestic abuse services. Great, yeah, lots of topics there. I think sometimes that can be, you know, that's as much as it forms a big part of the work, is deciding what the priorities are. And I suppose having opportunity to address it as well. You know, it's what's the likelihood that this is something that we can change? Is it local practice that we can get involved in? Is it going to be a longer term policy change that we need a lot of voices behind to get through? You know, I can see, yeah, ideas are coming through as people are reflecting on the ideas. Yeah, interesting to see, yeah, Jobcentre routes. So how do agencies get involved and support vulnerable clients with complex needs? Yeah, that's an interesting one. Right, we'll just give it 5-10 more seconds. Oh, there's still more coming through. Fantastic. Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts. Yeah, you can certainly see from that it's there's not just one thing, is there? And I think that's what makes the role so complex. It's not just sort of one big policy that addressing that one thing would move everything forward. There's lots of different strands of work there. Fantastic. Okay, shall we move on to the next slide? We've always got the chat, so if there's more thoughts that come to you or particular questions that you'd like to ask, yeah, there's the Q&A box as well. Thank you. So I think those yeah, those thoughts kind of show that there's lots of different levels as well where changes might be needed. We did want to sort of cover some of the national bigger picture influencing, with a particular example of DWP. I think Donna in Blackpool, you've shown that you can really engage locally with job centres and you know, specific locality practice. Something that we found particularly with UC, I think, is that so much more of the benefits administration is at a national level. So as an example, locally, I know we've been asking about particular letters that are issued to clients, and you know, a request such as, could the helpline number be moved further up the letter? Could it be earlier on in the text of a letter? That's something that we've, you know, you can discuss with your local DWP partnership lead and your local job centre, but it's a national template. So they can't change it. They might be able to say, yes, we agree that would be nice to change it, but we can't change it. It's a national thing. So I think something to be aware of, where Donna's mentioned the partnership managers within DWP, even if the issue isn't a local issue that they can change, it may be something that they can escalate nationally. So there might be sort of a list of various changes that at some point in the future will be picked up. And I think I'd certainly encourage people to liaise with their partnership managers and try and get some of those issues raised if you feel it's something that would make a difference on a national level. And then again, it was coincidentally, I suppose, Donna and myself were actually involved in some work with the DWP a couple of years ago, where they invited a number of external agencies, including the Frontline Network, to review their internal homelessness guidance, which is sort of their national guidance that's used to sort of inform and train job coaches and local job centre staff. So Donna, hopefully you're still there. Hello.
I am. Hello.
I've just been wittering on, so I thought I'll throw back to you, because you were able to track down the changes. So in terms of that internal guidance, we reviewed it, we went through it with a number of other agencies, so Crisis, St Mungo's, and made some suggestions regarding that guidance, and you were able to track it down through some sleuthing on the internet.
I know, I did. I was quite impressed that I found it. I was even more impressed that a lot of the proposals and the changes and the points that we made as part of that consultation had been taken on board and like added into the guidance. So it's been most particularly around homelessness and easements, something that I wasn't particularly sure of prior to the meeting, and I know through bringing it up in our UC forums, a lot of frontline workers aren't particularly sure about the easements either. Yeah, so anyway, so it's a document that we were asked to review around homelessness and easements. That's you can find it in the House of Commons library, which I found it after lots of digging and everything. So I've got it in front of me. And it was first published in April 2016, updated in August 2016, and then I think the next publication, it hasn't got a date, but that was a result of us attending. You say a couple of years ago, that means 3 years ago, doesn't it?
It was a few, yeah. The last 2 years don't count though, do you?
Yeah.
So.
And just to say, sorry Donna, just to say Amanda has dropped a link into the chat so that people can go and have a read of that document.
Brilliant.
Yeah, you could just say a little bit more about easements as well, just in case anyone's not aware of what that is.
So easements is depending on a person's circumstances. In this instance, it was homelessness. There are easements for domestic abuse and substance misuse and addictions, I think they call it in this. So it's where it's used as, it's called switching off in job centres. The requirement to look for jobs and the claimant commitments can be switched off while a person is either getting support or addressing the issues that is preventing them for looking for jobs and for sustaining employment. It can, I think it can go up to 6 months. I think depending on circumstances, that's down to the work coach's discretion, and therefore that's why it was quite essential for the guidance to be right, really. Do you know what I mean? That the initial guidance was quite narrow. Their definition of homelessness, well, there wasn't one, and it's basically, I think if someone hasn't got that understanding of the broader definition of homelessness and and at risk of homelessness, which I think was key, which like we're all sort of like chipping away throughout the document, that you don't have to necessarily be living on the streets, rough sleeping, or just actually to be like wait until that point of eviction for this to be an issue for people to look for work. So in the the updated guidance, which incidentally is archived on rights.net. However, we do hope that that has filtered through down to the official guidance, which will be in the job centres for work coaches to refer to when speaking with people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So we managed to get in the types of homelessness, which like not necessarily rough sleeping or in a hostel. It can be unsafe, unsuitable living accommodation. It can be like at risk of homelessness with rent or mortgage arrears, for example. It's not necessarily substance misuse, mental health issues or domestic abuse which can cause someone to be at risk of homelessness. It can be debt, simple as that really. Do you know what I mean? So it's about like ensuring that there's awareness of all the different types of homelessness. We also managed to get in hidden homelessness in the guidance, which was good. We also managed to get the legal definitions of homelessness in, which we used as an example, the definition that local authorities use in housing options. We also managed to get the duty to refer into the document that, although I think what was very, very stark when we went to the meeting at DWP HQ, I think Zoe will agree, is like the expectations of the work coaches to be able to identify all these issues. But we found it like essential for the work coaches to be able to actually understand all the different circumstances around homelessness that they may not present. I think another thing that we found is in the initial guidance, there was it sort of lacked, for want of a better, trauma-informed approach. There was a lot of like direct questioning that they were asked to be able to do. For example, what circumstances led to you becoming homeless? When you think of someone presenting at a job centre with lots of people around you, and a work coach that you've not necessarily met before, to have to sit and explain in a job centre, in a very busy job centre usually, what circumstances have led you to become homeless. We found that a little bit could be improved. Like we at least asked if there could be at least a side room or something that like that could be asked at. There was also, do you currently have access to washing and laundry facilities, which we felt was a little bit unnecessary. And how long do you see this situation lasting for, which would then determine the length of easements, if an easement. And basically, I don't think anyone experiencing homelessness or risk of homelessness would be able to answer that question. What was pleasing is that we found out that determining the claimant's current situation in an initial work coach interview had been totally taken out, which we found quite reassuring. And that directly, we hope, we certainly have seen it in Blackpool, with improved relationships between work coaches and claimants, and work coaches are better able to support the people who are claiming benefits. So we did see a massive improvement there. So I think that was like a really important piece of work, and highlights like the national policy directly influencing grassroots approaches. So yeah.
Definitely. It kind of, it feels like it's yet another layer as well, isn't it? Because none of that work needed the law to be changed. There was no sort of new legislation going through to change what universal credit was, or who qualified for it, or how it worked. But it's another layer then, that there's national guidance. How do you make sure that that's as accurate as it can be? And I think it was a really timely review, because it was, I mean, this dates it as well. It was within a year of the Homelessness Reduction Act coming in. So that did as well, that really influenced how do you define homelessness? What does it mean to be experiencing homelessness? And yeah, we must have said threatened with homelessness like 15 times in the meeting. Every time it came up, it was like bingo, wasn't it? But yeah, you know, it's another example of how, yeah, the national work then feeds down to the local delivery as well, but also to realise how much time that takes to do a kind of national review of your guidance. How long does that then take to be amended, to be filtered down? Is it when the new job coaches start to get trained? Do they then, you know, are they then referring to that guidance instead of the old guidance? How long does it take to filter through? But it does filter through. And again, I think, you know, it's just another example of how the Frontline Network can help amplify what we've heard from the frontline and what we think needs to change. I mean, one thing that really struck me as well is that the homelessness guidance within DWP was really focused on the easements. And the you know, it was very much, we want people to be supported and not have to search for work whilst they're going through these experiences. So it's then the local policy of how that is actually implemented. There's so much scope of doing it in so many different ways, isn't there? So that's where with your work with local job centres then becomes really important. And like you were talking about, we're all on the same side. We all want to support clients to the best of our ability, and it isn't, you know, we shouldn't be fighting against each other. We all want the same outcome. So I think even seeing the guidance and understanding what people are expected to do, like you say, how much experience a work coach is expected to have of identifying all these, you know, such complex issues, that we within the sector, we have like specialists for each one of those issues, but then a job coach is expected to kind of spot all of it in one go, aren't they? So again, to use the networks and to use local agencies to really understand how those processes kind of fit together, I think is a really important point. And I think that brings us to the final point on here, really, to I think the review of that guidance, obviously we were invited to it. So the best time to try and make a change to policy or guidance or local processes is when those decision makers are saying, we'd like to hear your thoughts. You know, because that shows that they're open to change, that they're looking for better ways of doing things. They want to know what they could change. So yeah, really just a point to look out for those calls for evidence, and those more formal consultations as well, because you're pushing at an open door at that point. If someone's saying, what do you think on this? Well, I have some thoughts and here they are. And yeah, I think I made a point when we were talking about this earlier in the week. When it comes to consultations, they can seem really off-putting. They can seem really sort of academic and densely worded and go on for pages and pages and pages. So my top tip with consultations is, if you only want to answer one question, just answer one question. You know, if there's 99 questions that you just write no opinion or NA, you know, it's far better to contribute your thoughts on one particular point than try and do it all and just give up halfway through, because it can be really long-winded. So be prepared for that. Obviously it's great if you can respond as much as you can to these kind of things, but when those calls for evidence and those consultations are out there, they're for the general public as much as for agencies. So you can contribute as yourself. Your clients may want to contribute and really give their sort of first-hand experience of those processes, and if they just want to answer that one box that relates specifically to their experience, generally with consultations that is an option. So I would recommend that as a bit of a top tip if you'd like to get involved in that kind of work as well. Do we have another slide? Is there a final? There we go, Q&A. I feel like we've talked, haven't we?
You've covered a lot of ground.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you both very much. So if anyone has anything that they'd like to ask either Donna or Zoe, or any or your experience of working either as a DWP employee or working with the Jobcentre, do pipe up virtually in the chat. We've got a few questions that we've thought about in advance of this, in the event of not having other questions, and so some of these are my own questions that I'd like to know the answers to, guys, which is, so initially, how did you take the first steps to set up those, to build those partnership relationships with the services, and to build up to close working, and that conversation happening? Obviously, you've got your frontline networks, but what were the challenges that you experienced?
It's probably a question for me based on the slides, isn't it? To be totally honest, we didn't have many challenges. It was quite a smooth process for us. I think one of the challenges was timing it right for the work coaches to be able to be free to come along, and we set out up our UC focus groups after working hours, 5 o'clock, 5:30, enough time for them to run down from the job centre. They were frazzled, absolutely frazzled. We did ensure that the work coaches came along as frontline workers, not as DWP staff, to be sort of like headhunted and like questions about like issues and everything. So that was really essential, and for them to get an understanding of what services were going on. And we always made sure that there was everyone introduced themselves, that there was always a presentation from a service that may be useful for work coaches, so it's of mutual benefit really. So I think it was just ensuring that the work coaches had the time to attend. I think that was our main challenge. I think what helped the process was that we always checked in with everyone afterwards. I thought that that was quite important, to make sure everyone was comfortable with the process, and that sometimes the sessions could get a bit vocal, and they're quite organic groups, so there'd be people with issues that what they wanted addressed that weren't being addressed. And so we found it really important to ensure that everyone got a chance to speak, that no one was directly challenged, and that we all checked in to make sure everyone was comfortable with how things went. We did find that DWP very much enjoyed attending our UC forums and look forward to attending. So yeah, I think timing was like key for us, and I think that preempting issues, setting up the focus group prior to the rollout, so those relationships was like beginning to be formed, and people knew who each other were, and we would be able to like express our concerns ahead of the game, sort of thing. So I think timing was key, and I think that really helped the process for us. And having really accessible partnerships managers and advisors, and pretty fabulous work coaches as well. Do you know what I mean? And I think everyone, there was a mutual respect that was built amongst frontline workers, work coaches, and partnerships managers that I don't think existed beforehand. So yeah, it was a positive process throughout, really. I think over the pandemic, that has obviously fallen a little bit by the wayside, and organisational restructures, both within homelessness services and DWP. So it's about building and maintaining those links. And as we discussed, it's a fluid process that needs work, really. So I hope that answers that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, as you say, it's about human connection, isn't it? And recognising everybody's trying to work towards the same goals. We've got some questions coming in. We've got a question from Ed, who would like to ask, how important is it to understand the capacities or motivations of the partners that you want to work with? And do they have to want exactly what you want?
Yeah, I suppose where we were talking about not expecting to get everything that you ask for. You know, I think one example actually with the local authority charging policy, for example, even within the room within frontline workers, you're not going to get a consistent view about what everybody wants. The charging policy in that example brought in council tax and utility bills for people living in temporary accommodation, and some frontline workers felt that would financially disadvantage clients who were already in a very vulnerable position, struggling financially. They're in TA, they're might be facing additional travel costs to schools and social networks because they're suddenly somewhere completely different in the city. So they felt that it wasn't fair to put those charges on people in that situation. Other frontline workers in the same meeting said, well, actually, that will help people become more tenancy ready. If they can show that they're paying council tax and regular utility bills, landlords might be more willing to take them on and to help them move on from TA into somewhere more settled. So straight away, you've got like two completely different views from within frontline workers doing essentially the same job. So I suppose, yeah, it's about recognizing that there are lots of different viewpoints and we're not all going to agree about everything all the time. I think, as I say, when policies come out for consultation, they're probably 90% set in stone at that point. That's how it feels. So I suppose the earlier we can all get involved in those discussions, the more chance you might have of steering discussion and steering policy perhaps at an earlier stage. So yeah, I mean, I suppose in terms of the capacity and motivations of who you're working with as well, some of that comes back to understanding, is it a local decision that your contacts can make, or is it something that even if they wanted to change it, they can't because it sits somewhere else? And then if they do want to change it, how long is that likely to take? So yeah, I think some of this work is about understanding where the opportunity sits, and I suppose deciding, do you want to concentrate on like a small win that you can probably get, or do you want to go for the big ticket, like let's remove the no recourse to public funds condition? Something huge like that would be a very different approach, and a very different, I think you have to kind of set your expectations at different levels as well. And I think also understand, I suppose, who's the best person to take it forward. I think within the Frontline network, we're really lucky to have contacts with lots of different types of agencies. So you've got sort of immigration specialists, or you've got someone who has the view on domestic abuse issues. You know, you can go to the people who have, I suppose, the most authority and the most understanding of particular topics, and perhaps be steered by them rather than trying to be an expert in everything. Like we've talked about, there's so many different specialisms that we need expertise in, really. So yeah, I suppose it's important to understand how likely it is that you're going to you know, succeed with something, and where you actually want to put your efforts, I suppose.
Yeah, can I just add as well, we found for us it can be quite a positive to understand capacity, limitations, roles and responsibilities, and that can be like an improver to building relationships and like more appropriate signposting. Do you know what I mean? So once you've got an understanding of that someone's maybe not being a barrier, that's their limitation that they can work within, that then we can like signpost more appropriately to get the more effective support that a person needs.
Thank you. We've got a question from Sam, who's asking, how can you find out about whether there's a homelessness forum in your area? And just to add to that, I guess in some areas, if there isn't a homelessness forum, is there another sort of forum where you would be able to raise these issues? If it's not called a homelessness forum, what might else it be called?
Yeah, good question. I mean, as I say, we've got a fairly established one in our area, but it's not something that you could pop onto the council website and just track down. So I suppose if you know some council contacts, particularly within housing and homelessness, I suppose your homelessness prevention team might be a good place to start, just to ask if there is that kind of meeting there. Yeah, I mean, I suppose if there isn't one, it's, yeah, again, I guess subject to capacity, if it's something that can be set up. I suppose we're all quite used to working online as well now, so things can be sort of clicked into a calendar at the, you know, just the click of a mouse, and you've got a meeting set up. But obviously well, I mean, you do sort of see the difference, don't you, with face-to-face meetings? I know some of these discussions, particularly when you're looking at building relationships and learning from other people, face-to-face is going to be the preferred option. But yeah, I suppose it may well be a case of having to set one up if there isn't one in your area, if that's something that local agencies are looking to do. There you go. Yeah, if there isn't one. But obviously, yeah, I mean, obviously it's always going to be subject to capacity. And I suppose, Donna, like you're talking about buy-in, it's about having the right people in the room, and yeah, I suppose knowing that it's going to go somewhere as well. I think for initial setting up something like that, you can talk and all the agencies can be there and talk about how we'd like to get things changed. But it probably comes back to then identifying who can do something about it and trying to get them on board as well, which I suppose with local homelessness services, it's likely to be your local authority. Yeah, I don't know whether the Frontline network could help connect people in certain areas, if you're in a particular area and you'd like to know if there is a homelessness forum, we might be able to connect with other agencies in that location. But yeah, I suppose it's similar to partnership managers, isn't it? For DWP partnership managers, I don't think you can just Google and say who's the partnership manager for Leicester or Newcastle. A lot of it is about kind of connecting with people and asking those questions. Yeah, Amanda's suggesting Homeless Link as well, as the national membership body across the country. They're likely to have some further information, and they have partnership managers as well, don't they? So their own Homeless Link partnership managers may have some good contacts as well, because they cover the whole country with different patches.
Yeah, if you sort of Googled, I think it's divided up into areas of London, then you've got south, southeast, then you've got the north, which is pretty big. Midland. But if you contact your the partnership manager via Homeless Link, obviously if you're not like close to a Frontline network, of course, because there is an increase in need and in desire for partnership working, so there will be some kind of partnership like group going on in your area somewhere under some guise. Like we have multiple disadvantage groups as well. We've got like strategic groups, they're mainly run by the council, and then your more operational groups run by Frontline Network and like other local organisations. But yeah, they have communities of practice, and I'm sure if like you joined one of their Homeless Links communities of practice, you'd be able to link in. It's like a web of networks, isn't it, really? So there will be something definitely going on in your area. I think Amanda's just put up the networks for, is that the Frontline Network organisation?
Yes. So that's where you can find out if there is a local network that you can access in your area, and if not, then do stay connected with the national Frontline network, because we're always looking for new opportunities to reach areas where there isn't an infrastructure of mutual support for frontline staff. So you know, if there's not one now, there may yet become one. So, you know, stay tuned for that. We've got another question, which is around specifically when frontline staff have struggled with issues for their clients with the DWP around benefits. Were staff able to use the Frontline network meetings to engage Jobcentre staff and DWP staff around benefit issues that their clients were experiencing? And have you got any examples of how they collaborated? I know that you wouldn't be able to talk about, obviously, individual cases, but are there any examples of how collaboration could overcome those issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our universal credit forums, as I said earlier, that we managed to get like the relationships built up before the rollout, and we were able to iron out as many as best we could, any issues as and when they arose. So there was a section of our universal credit forums that anonymously they'll be able to thrash out an issue that they were struggling to address for a claimant. So yeah, issues could get addressed actually there and then. And partnerships manager could say, oh, could be because of this, or have you tried contacting this person, and it could totally, I think we've got many issues sorted out there and then, and if they couldn't, the partnerships manager would take it away and like it would be escalated and addressed when they go back to the office. So yeah, many issues were sorted out. So yeah, it was very
just shows that it goes from the grassroots all the way through, that, you know, working together is sort of addressing those issues at every level.
Yeah, and we could also, if they weren't being addressed, we could find out why they weren't being addressed. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, if it was an issue for Makerfield, which is the decision makers area for our locality, we could like find out that it's not being addressed because the issues sitting at the decision makers and things like that. So if it reduced that frustration, even if it wasn't being addressed, because we'd understand why it wasn't able to be addressed at that point. So yeah.
Okay, so are there any other questions coming in? We've got a few more minutes. We've got one earlier question here, which is that if organisations or teams are experiencing challenges to working with colleagues from different sectors, or generally with their contacts, this might not necessarily be within a frontline network context, this might just be on a day-to-day basis. What takeaways could you suggest to overcome those potential barriers?
I think a lot of it is about understanding, isn't it? I think, Donna, your example is just really powerful, that you know, agencies that you kind of see as a bit them and us, we actually do all want the same thing. We're all supporting clients in similar positions, and it's people operating within their own limitations. Like you say, how it's less frustrating. You still want to get an issue resolved, but you can understand it's not within that person's power to do something about it. So I suppose, yeah, but just being able to hold any kind of meeting in any format, really, and just sort of showing the benefit of just having a chat with people. It sounds really basic, doesn't it? It's like there's no sort of mystique about it, really. I think the benefit of just catching up with someone for half an hour every month to kind of say, what sort of issues are you seeing? Oh, actually, someone mentioned something about that to me. Have you tried speaking to that person? Just to kind of connect with people and see what's going on. I suppose, yeah, almost without an agenda sometimes can be quite useful. You know, sort of no sort of list of topics that you specifically have to discuss, just to try and get in a room with someone or get in a Teams chat with someone to talk things through and see where they're going, and then understanding where that power actually sits to do anything about it. As you've said, it's not necessarily those people, it's not the job coaches themselves, or it's not that particular frontline worker that can do much about it. Ed's made a point in the chat about bringing debate about homelessness into other existing forums. So you might not have a homelessness forum, but you might have a universal credit group or a DWP liaison group. And there's, yeah, absolutely no harm in putting homelessness on the agenda in that context as well, because it naturally is going to overlap with lots of different issues as well. You know, it doesn't have to be kind of framed as homelessness. It will be clients experiencing homelessness, accessing benefits, accessing healthcare, using food banks, whatever else it might be. So looking for those other links as well, I suppose. I don't know if I've answered the question there, really.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got a contribution from John, who has said that they're lucky to have access to a DWP community engagement advisor. I don't know where you are, John, but that sounds great. That's working with the CAB in partnership with the police and probation. And it's an effective shortcut to establishing client with complex needs. So establishing that a client has complex needs and then expedite decision making for that person. And he adds that sharing case studies and outcomes can be an effective tool to illustrate the power of cooperative working. And John is coming in from North Staffs and Stoke-on-Trent. Thanks, John. Yeah, so that, I mean, that sounds like a great person, a great role to have in place there at the DWP, but also something that perhaps can be instigated through other opportunities to share in other existing multi-agency forums, sharing examples and just really raising awareness through case studies around the work that people are doing and the challenges. Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, last call for questions, we'll go on to back onto the slides, please, Rachel. Okay, thank you, Donna and Zoe. So this has been a really, really interesting morning. Thank you both very much. We've got lots of comments saying thank you, and it's been a very helpful session. So yeah, thank you both very much. If you've got any final closing comments, please please feel free. And we've got a couple more questions on Menti. If any attendees would be very grateful just to get a bit of feedback from you. If you're happy to go back to Menti for one last time. Yeah, and that's all from me. Donna and Zoe, I'll let you finish up.
I'll just finish up by saying thank you for listening to my waffle. I hope I made some kind of sense. And Zoe, we survived.
Yes, here we are. Yes, thank you everyone for listening. I think that the point John makes about sharing the case studies, you know, it's all about this, isn't it? It's just saying, well, in our area we tried this and this worked. This wasn't 100% successful, but we tried something else, and this is, you know, I think reflecting on the work that we've done has made us quite energized about actually we could reconnect with these people. We should probably refresh those relationships, look at what we achieved here. It's always useful just to stop and reflect on the work that you do and share it with others. And I think it's the national network is here to really to share those kind of case studies. So if you've got a particular example in your area, anyone that you'd like to share in a similar way, or through a blog, through our newsletter, then do, you know, feel free to get in touch with the national network and share that best practice far and wide. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Zoe. And we've got one last Menti question. Amanda's put some chats in, sorry, she's put some comments there in the chat. If you want to find out more about the Frontline Network, or if you'd like to attend our next partnership meeting, our next partnership themed conference session, which is this Thursday afternoon, that's on working with the private rented sector. And this last question is just to let us know if there's anything in particular that you would like to hear us talk about, you'd like us to organise an event on in the future, any topics, just let us know. And very many thanks for attending and for your contributions.